This is a 4 terabyte SSD drive, and this drive is gonna fail someday. This is just a typical cheap little hard drive. This is also gonna fail someday. Now, these are those big internal hard drives you'll find in like servers, or you'll find them in, bigger external drives. Well, these are also gonna fail someday. Now, the reason I have so many drives in so many places is that I've had issues where a hard drive fails and I lose a ton of footage.
Back up! Back up! Back up, Joel! Full speed! Back up!
And so I want to go through my workflow when it comes to backing up data and how I manage so much data, but I also want to dive into how storage systems work, whether you're just using a single hard drive, you're using a RAID type system, or you're backing up things on the cloud. There's lots of ways to use all of these products, and all of them have problems, and all of them are guaranteed to fail at some point. In the past, I've had hard drives crash and I've lost data. So in this video, I'm going to do a deep dive into data management and some different solutions that are out there, as well as at the end of this video, I'm going to give you my exact workflow step by step. And I'm using this workflow because it's the simplest way to back up my data and make sure I never lose anything, while also being cost effective and easy to use, so that I'm not spending a ton of time moving data around and trying to manage all of this different footage that's on all these hard drives. Now, outside of YouTube, I have a production company and we shoot mainly fitness videos. So I had a project that I was working on a few years ago. It was a massive project. We're talking $100,000 days of production. It's because we had full crew, we had 6 cameras, I was shooting on 4 Reds and 2 GH4s, which, you know what, in the end, they ended up matching in the final edit, but that's a different story. We had lighting crew, we had catering, we had set designers, we had a studio that cost over $10,000 a day. Then we had to build out that studio. We had all these operators, all of these different moving parts, which totaled up to around $100,000 a day in production. Now, because of the style in which we're shooting, there's not really the opportunity to go back and reshoot something. So up until this point, I never really thought about data management in terms of multiple backups on backups on backup. When I was on set, I was always having just basically one copy when I was recording. But on this set, I was working with a producer who insisted on having a backup on each camera. And so what we did on the shoot, we ran a backup recording on an Atomos external monitor while we were recording the raw footage in the Red cameras. But what happened towards the end of the day, after we had done 2 of these big workouts, is that the hard drive that was in the Red camera, the SSD drive, failed. And there was no way to recover it. Like, it completely just fried. And so I didn't have any footage from the A camera, which is the main camera. And the issue is, if we don't have that A camera, well, it kind of messes up the entire day of production, because that A camera, kind of the key camera. That's where the talent was talking directly to. But because we had that backup recording on set, the A camera was salvageable from the Atomos recorders. We had 2 copies recording at all times, and that saved us from losing $100,000 worth of footage, because that whole day would have had to have been scrapped and reshot. So after that experience, I've always shot in a way where there's never just one fail point. So when it comes to data management, the questions I had was, what's the best solution to have the least amount of fail points so that you don't lose footage? The second question is, what about RAID drives versus just using a single hard drive? And the third question is, why not just stick all of this data in the cloud? And the fourth is, what's the fastest way to do all of this data management? Because when you have tons of data, it could take a lot of time to sort things and make sure you know where everything is. So will your cheap $100 hard drive fail that's 5 terabytes? Yes, this is going to fail. SSD drives are supposed to be stronger and more reliable because there's no moving parts in these drives. In a standard hard drive, there's a spinning disk and it actually fails faster than an SSD which has no moving parts. However, these things are not going to last forever. These will also fail at some point. And it all depends on time. The longer that you have a drive and the more that you use it, the more chance that it's going to fail. Now, what about SD cards? Well, the card in the camera, that also will fail at some point. The more that you pop it in and out of your camera, the more that you write on it and format it, it's going to cause the card to degrade over time, and eventually the card will also fail. So we're working in the system of data where everything has a chance of failing at some point. So we want to eliminate the chance for just having one fail point where we end up losing the data, especially when it's tied to money. So if you're working for someone, the last thing you want to do is go and tell your client that you lost all their data. So when you look at your workflow overall, you have to take in consideration, well, how many copies of your footage do you have at one time? And is there any point that you only have one copy of that footage? And that's where you want to try and find a solution so you always have at least two. Because if you could have at least two, if you have a duplicate of everything that you're doing, then if one drive fails, well, then you're still saved because you have the second drive, and then you can just copy that onto a new one. Now, the last thing when it comes to fail points is catastrophic failure. What happens if your office or your house burns down with all of your data in it? How about if someone steals your bag or your camera case and it has all the cards in it? So with all of these fail points, there's just a lot of opportunity for your footage to get lost. And that's just one of the things you have to take in consideration when you're forming a workflow for data management. So with raids, you have to really dig into what a raid is and if it makes sense. Basically, a RAID hard drive is a series of hard drives put together, and there is different styles of RAID that allow you to duplicate the footage in different ways so that if a drive fails, you can actually recover the entire system rather than actually losing your data. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Robo. This is a RAID system with 5 different drives in it. I got this drive a while ago. So this was marketed as a 10 terabyte RAID system. The issue is the 10 terabytes means that it's 5 2 terabyte drives. So it's 5 of these. And if you're using this as 10 terabytes, which is the full capacity with all of these drives combined, then there's nothing protecting your footage from failing. And instead of having one fail point just being a singular drive, you now have 5 fail points. So you can imagine how the probability of a drive failing goes up exponentially the more drives that you have in the system. So these big systems, when they're marketed as like 96 terabytes or 20 terabytes, but it's over multiple drives, they're actually not as safe to use as a singular drive. Now, RAID 0, which is what I'm talking about, is when you don't have any level of protection across the drives. It's basically just combining all the drives in this unit into one big hard drive. If one drive fails, you lose all your data and there's no way to recover it. Unless you send it into one of those companies that recovers data for you, and then you're spending a ton of money and you don't even know if you'll actually get your data back. Now, a hard drive setup that has RAID 1 on it basically means mirroring. So if you have one drive, it's going to duplicate the exact same data onto a second drive. Now, what that means for a big drive is that if you get like a 20 terabyte RAID setup and you set it to RAID 1, well, you're actually only going to get 10 terabytes out of that drive. So it's going to significantly reduce the amount of data that you have in that system. Now, beyond just straight cloning of drives, there's RAID 5, there's RAID 6, there's other forms of RAID. But basically what the other styles of RAID setups are is a way of fracturing your data into blocks and then putting it across all of the drives so that if there is a drive failure, then the RAID system will rebuild all of the data and restore everything for you. So effectively, you lose the capacity of one drive and it protects the system. And when you're using a RAID setup, if your drive fails, you can pull that broken drive out, put a new drive in, and then you have to wait for it to rebuild. Now, here's where the problem comes up in using a RAID system. Say your drive fails and you're rebuilding your system and a second drive fails. Well, you lost all your data. So if at any point before it's rebuilt, you have a second drive loss or 2 were lost in the initial fail, well, then you lost all your data. Now with RAID 6, you have less capacity, but you have 2 drives that could fail. Now the issue comes up with the amount of data that we're dealing with nowadays. If you have a 96 terabyte drive and you have to rebuild one of those hard drives, it could take weeks. And if you're working with clients and you have projects in the works and then the drive fails and you have to rebuild your system, well, that causes so many issues and you basically just lost a ton of time. This is why I don't use RAID systems anymore, because I can't have that downtime when I'm trying to have a system rebuild. Now, there are a lot of reasons why you might want to use one of these systems. They are super useful, and I want to talk about some of the positives and why they actually work well. So I personally have two Synology 12-bay NAS systems, and basically what these are 12 drives. But the thing about these drives is that there's actually a computer built into these systems. So there's two computers here on top of my computer that I work off of. Now, the reason that you would want that is you have access to that footage anywhere in the world. It's connected to the internet. So if I'm working with editors or I need to send files to someone, well, they can live on that system and people can access all those files. Now, if you're in an office setting with multiple editors and you need a lot of people to access the same footage, you can set these up on a network and everyone can have access to the same system. So there are a lot of good uses for one of these systems. And if it makes sense for what you're doing and you need to have that kind of capability, then I would work with one of these. However, the issue is you have to think about this as a singular source. You can't think of this as your backup and redundant source. This is like one source. So if you're going to use one of these systems, you need to have a duplicate system, a whole nother RAID NAS setup that's automatically duplicating so that you never actually lose it if the whole system goes down. And that drive should be off-site. When I was working primarily off of just this system, I had one Synology 12-bay here in my office, and the second was at my data center out in the desert, aka my parents' house, and the footage automatically duplicated onto that second system whenever I put it onto the first system. It was always creating backups. Now the issue is with the internet speeds and everything else, even though we had fast internet, it would get hung up and I would get like 40 days behind the backup just because I'm moving so much data around. So this system doesn't work for me, and that's why I moved into a completely different workflow. But first, let's talk about cloud storage. Now, when you put your data in the cloud, your data is still physically stored somewhere in the world. It's not like it just magically goes into the internet. Your data is physically on a hard drive in a data center. Now, if you've never seen a data center before, I highly suggest you check out this video from Google. It's kind of a cheesy video when you watch it and listen to their performances, but they take you through one of Google's data centers, and I think it's super eye-opening to understand how a data center works and what's involved in a data center. But essentially in these data centers, you have huge setups that have hundreds, thousands of hard drives involved. Their system is set up in a way where, yes, drives fail all the time. When you have hundreds and thousands of drives in a server racks, drives are going to be failing every day. But they have these systems built in a way where when you pull a drive out, you just put a new drive in and the system will rebuild itself and you can lose multiple drives. And also your data might be split in multiple places around the world. And I know this is something that happens here on YouTube. Videos are copied to different parts around the world so that they're served up faster. Because if all the data was coming from one data center in California, well, places across the world, it would take a little while for those videos to pop up and load. So there's data centers all over the world. You can only imagine how big those are for Google and YouTube and all the infrastructure they had to build to be able to make this system work. Now, I don't upload all my footage to the cloud because I deal with lots of data. Video footage, especially nowadays, is getting bigger and bigger. Every day of footage for my production company is 1 terabyte or more. So uploading that to the cloud would end up costing a lot of money. Now, when it comes to cloud storage, there's kind of two ways you can go. You could go the Backblaze or Amazon AWS, which is endless supply of storage, but you're paying the more you put into it, or a solution like Dropbox or Google Drive where you just pay a monthly. How these pricing structures work are different. With the Dropbox and Google Drive, you pay a monthly fee and you get access to a little amount in data. Like 2 terabytes is not that much. And that's to store raw footage in there just doesn't make sense. if you're dealing with smaller files and you don't have that much data, like that system could work and it's not super expensive. Now, when you're using something like Backblaze or AWS, you pay for more data that you put into it. So when you're putting in terabytes and terabytes of footage, basically you're racking up a bill that's going to start increasing over time. And that amount is going to be a consistent payment that you're always going to have to do to keep this footage stored on a server somewhere. Now, on top of it, when you're working with these systems, you have to pay to upload footage and you have to pay to download footage. And the speed at which you need access to that data also costs more. So if you want stuff immediate, you're going to be paying top dollar for it. Whereas if you need like 48-hour or 72-hour access, well, it's a little bit cheaper, but then you don't have access to your data right away. I personally don't want to have this monthly fee that's going to just grow exponentially over time as my massive data gets bigger and bigger. It just becomes a reoccurring cost that I'm always going to have to pay to keep this data somewhere in the cloud. Now, a couple things I want to chime in here and add. One is if you have your footage stored on the cloud somewhere, you're basically storing your data in a service that could change the rules. They could change their pricing structure. So all of a sudden you could be spending more money to keep your footage stored at one of these data centers. Now, on the flip side, cloud storage could be super useful for someone who is constantly on the move and they don't have access to a place to be able to store footage where you can't avoid the catastrophic failure. So for example, if you're like a travel vlogger or, a van life vlogger, well, all your footage should be somewhere outside of where you're traveling, because if your bags get stolen, if something gets stolen out of your van, well, now all of a sudden you lost everything. So you want to have a secondary backup that's outside of where you're at. So in a situation like that, cloud storage would make sense, at least until you could get to a point where you could pull it off the cloud and store it in a secondary location that's safe. Now let's dig into my workflow for backing up footage. So I used to use one of these Synologies as my backup solution, but the issue for me is some of the things we talked about earlier, but also this is eventually going to fill up. Even though there's 12 drives, it will still get to a point where you will fill this up and then you have to get another one. And these alone are $1,500 just for the box, and that's not including all the drives. So I moved into a completely different direction because I don't ever want to be getting to that point where I'll hit a limit. I personally just use individual drives. And so my workflow goes like this. When I'm filming, I try to always have 2 copies of the footage being recorded. So when I'm shooting with the A7S Mark III or my FX6, I do a dual recording onto both card slots. That way, I have the same footage being duplicated on both cards. Now, if I'm shooting on something like my drone or my GoPro, where I only have one card, I'm not going to worry as much about having 2 different copies. Instead, I'm just going to make sure that I offload that footage as soon as possible. So typically what I do is I'll shoot for a day and then offload that footage at night. I never push it more than a day's worth of footage on a card. And with that, I don't use massive cards and I don't let them just fill up with days and days of footage. And so when I'm ready to bring the footage off the cards, I put it onto 3 drives. So here in my office, I have a hard drive enclosure in my closet. So I can plug in up to 4 of these at once, which makes it super easy to work with because instead of having a RAID system where I have tons of data, I could just have 4 of these plugged in and they're going to show up as 4 hard drives on my computer, but I have access to a ton of footage without having to deal with the whole RAID setup. So I offload my footage to 3 hard drives, 2 of these and 1 SSD. Now the SSD becomes my main editing drive. This is what I work off of. So whether I'm editing or I have an editor working on a project, this is the edit drive. These are just backups. It's just complete duplicates of the raw data and anything else that I have for the production. Now, when the video is finished and I'm ready to move it off this drive, I make a duplicate onto these drives using Carbon Copy Cloner, and basically that finds whatever files have been altered or whatever files are new and brings them onto this drive. So it makes a complete backup of everything that I've done on the SSD. Now, I'll wipe this and I'll use it for my next project, but I still have 2 of these hard drives. And so I always keep 2 hard drives as a backup. And I never do anything else with these drives. These are primarily for backup, but if I ever need to go back into my data, I just pull one of these drives out and I work off of that drive. Now, in case of a catastrophic failure, I keep one of these off site. So I actually take it to a climate controlled storage facility that's right down the street, and it just sits in a Pelican case. So that way, when I have a project that's active, I have 3 copies of it and 1 is offsite. And for all the projects that are finished, I have 2 copies, 1 is offsite. Now, the reason I do it in this way is that I never have to worry about running out of space because I'll just get new hard drives. I never have to worry about moving things off of a big drive onto another drive. My data management is pretty much all done at the time of cards being transferred onto the drives and then finished projects being transferred onto the drives. Like, I don't touch it beyond that, and it keeps it super simple. Now, to be able to organize my entire system and know where all my data is, I use a program called Notion. And every time I start a new project, I give it a number. So in Notion, I can track my projects by number. I also put in the date and other info, and I could see which hard drive it's on and also which backup hard drive it's on. So if I ever need to go back and find a project or work with some footage that I shot in the past, it's super easy to find, and I'm never dealing with hard drives that just have a bunch of random data and I don't know what's on there. Now, I also use Notion to basically keep track of all of my notes. So any documents, scripts, outlines, anything like that will go into Notion, and any project assets will go into the project folder that's on the hard drive. So I'm never just putting data in random spots. I know exactly where everything is, and it keeps my workflow super simple. Now, if you're someone who just works off your phone or you work off your computer's hard drive, you could still use a similar type of system. I would just suggest you always back up to at least to 1 hard drive that's a different source. So just get one of these small hard drives and take whatever you're doing on your computer and back it up to here. And the same thing with your phone. You don't want to keep everything on your phone because if you lose it or it runs out of space, well, you're not gonna be able to create anything. So you always want to be backing up to external hard drives. And when I travel, I make it super simple. I don't bring these big hard drives with me. I still work off of an SSD drive, and I'll bring 2 of these smaller hard drives with me, and I'll back up all of my data to these. That way I keep the same workflow, 1 active, 2 backups. Now, that's a little overkill. You could have just 1 backup and that's fine. But when it comes to backing up your data, you never just want to have 1 copy. You always want to make sure that you're backing up to a secondary source somewhere. Now, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. What is your backup workflow? Also, I'm curious, do you like this style of video where I dig a little bit deeper into topics? But next, I highly suggest you check out this video right here. It goes through some editing techniques that's gonna really speed up your workflow. All right, guys, I'll see you over there.